I'm Liz Felix. It's 91.3 WYEP, and we are live and direct from home with Lake Street Dive. And joining me, Bridget, Kearney, and Mike Olson from the band. I want to ask you guys about making this album because obviously, no pun intended, there's been some weird stuff happening for the last year. So did you guys have this album pretty much done going into the pandemic last year, or did you work on it throughout this strange time?
It was pretty much done. We had the studio booked through sort of the early part of March. We all went home knowing something was coming. We had the whole thing finished, and then all of a sudden we all got home, and that's when everything shut down. So fortunately, it was in the can. We went into the can immediately after the record being canned.
Wow, that's pretty lucky. It sounds like you cut it pretty close.
Yeah, we were pretty lucky. We also managed to fit in like one last cruise. We were on a music cruise in February, like right before the pandemic. We were also in Mexico at Brandy Carlisle's festival in the end of January, like super, crowded room, tons of people. And we just had no idea that what was coming, of course, as everyone did. But I would say especially like the experience of being in the studio is oftentimes like a world unto itself where you're really like getting in deep rabbit holes and like not thinking about the outside world. And so I definitely emerged from the studio and was completely clueless that like this thing was hovering right over us.
Yeah, we had a tour booked in April, and we were like, we'll be fine.
It's funny to think back, a year into this and try to remember what your mindset was at the beginning, because I think for a lot of us, I thought, well, I might have to do my show from home. I didn't realize I would be doing it from home every day for, a year.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you guys were able to kind of get out and play those shows, and I'm curious about who you worked with as a producer, Mike Elizondo, who a lot of people know as working with Dr. Dre, which is like, seems almost kind of left field, although he's worked with a lot of big names. Tell me a little bit about how you got hooked up with him and the impact that he had on this album.
Well, we knew him. We had met him and worked with him a little bit from doing Chris Thiele's NPR show. That Mike Elizondo was he the music director? Is that his title on that show? And so we had played that a couple of times. Rachel had done it a few times on her own as well. And so we were definitely like, we knew who he was from his industry cred. We had met him. And when it came time to record and we were sort of boiling things down, I think a lot of the things that were really important to us going into the recording process, what did we want the record to sound like? Well, we want really like, great drum sounds. We want great vocal sounds. We want great songs. Like all of those criteria were sort of, are also things that you find on great hip hop records. They also are just good practice in the studio, and he has really great studio practice. And so it became less about like, what genre do we want this to slot into, and became more about like, is the personality right? And I suppose it was.
Knowing a little bit about how you guys write songs, it sounds like everybody in the band is a songwriter, and you kind of come together and put these songs together. I'm curious who wrote the songs that we just heard, Being a Woman and Same Old News.
Well, the song Being a Woman, I was the primary composer on. I am one of the women in the band, one of two. And yeah, that one, I guess, just kind of shed some light on the experience of being a woman these days and every day and for all time. But yeah, it's, I think it's somewhat of like a feminist song. And I would say, like, for me, I maybe came to feeling like I was a feminist later in life, like didn't realize that was important for me to consider myself that until I, the last couple of years, you realize that like having an attitude of sort of like denial about the facts of like what it means to be a woman in the world today is not helpful to yourself or to the larger needs of women everywhere. And so even though I feel like I've been, fortunate in a lot of ways to not suffer from some of the more difficult aspects of things that women suffer from, I am a member of this community, and in order to continue to reach towards like real equality, it's like important to be part of that conversation. So this was an effort to do that in a 3.5-minute pop song, which is a challenge, I will say.
Well, I think you pulled it off, and that was a song that really caught my ear on the album. And I think, it's interesting. There's being a woman, there's Making Do, which addresses climate change and the kind of craziness of this world that young people are inheriting. These are kind of serious topics, and I'm wondering, I don't know if you'd call these political songs or not. I guess they kind of are. Is this the first time that Lake Street Dive has kind of like dipped a toe into this world?
Sort of. With at least in a way that is as overt and sort of as this obvious. It's kind of a drag that having an opinion has to be called political, especially for a band where I would say we don't get this a ton, but there's definitely that vibe of like shut up and entertain us from some folks, especially on the internet, where you don't have to come face to face with someone to whom you are being offensive. But it's also like, if we are going to continue to be creative, I wouldn't say that we are relevant. I think that that's sort of like, super arbitrary. But if we're going to maintain any kind of, like I said, creativity and any kind of like truthfulness with one another as members of a band and songwriting partners, then to shy away from things that we actually care about would be, I think, a greater disservice to listeners and to fans than continuing to be, to exist under some kind of veneer of like pop music can only be one thing, whatever that is. So to do these songs that have a message was more just like, not only like an inward looking thing, which obviously songwriting it can be very inward facing, but it was also an outward looking thing where we were bringing that to one another, but outward looking also in a much larger sense where like we live in a time, in a reality, in a society where there's a great deal going on. There's a lot of stuff to dissect and to either be upset about or to think constructively or act constructively about. And so it was kind of just time for us to say things a little bit more, to put our cards on the table a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I feel like we've heard that from a lot of artists recently, and I don't know. It's been really interesting as a music listener to kind of hear people put themselves out there like that. So I'm glad that you guys did that on this album. I want to ask you about the future, and I know a lot of people are like, I'm not really sure what the future holds, but I see you guys have a couple outdoor shows booked, and what's next for Lake Street Dive with this album?
Well, to quote our own song, Hypotheticals, no one can see into the future. Even the weatherman gets caught in the rain sometimes. And that is to say, it's really difficult to know exactly what's next. But we're excited to be able to share this music with people. That's like so awesome to just have that in the bag and know that like no pandemic is going to prevent us from getting this music into people's ears. And then after that, you know, hopefully as soon as it's safe to do so, we'll hopefully be sharing these songs in person with people.
Well, I hope you guys can make it here to Pittsburgh, and I know YEP listeners are going to love this new album. Thanks once again to Mike McDuck Olson and Bridget Kearney from Lake Street Dive for talking with me today and sharing some songs from the new album. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Looking forward to listening more. Obviously, is the new record. Lake Street Dive is the band, and we are live and direct from home on 91.3 WYEP.